night, make sure you are not alone. Turn off the lights, put on your headphones, and even if you feel as though someone is standing right behind you, please do not turn around. Because the place we are about to enter is not imagination, it is a real location. A hospital that has been abandoned for 30 years. A place where no official records exist anymore, where people say that anyone who enters never truly leaves. The locals whisper its name very softly, very quietly, as if afraid that if they speak it aloud, the hospital will hear them. The hospital that does not allow you to leave. 30 years ago, that hospital was once the pride of the entire region. It stood isolated on the edge of town, between ancient forests and a concrete road cracked by time. In those days, the operating room lights burned through the night. Ambulances came and went without pause, and the smell of disinfectant seemed to seep into every brick and every wall. People believed the hospital saved lives, but no one noticed that from that place, many people never returned home. The night the hospital closed was a night of heavy rain. There was no official announcement, no ceremony. The next morning, the iron gates were sealed shut. The doctors had vanished, and the patients could no longer be identified. Medical records were quietly withdrawn, and within a single week, the hospital disappeared completely from administrative maps, as if it had never existed. But the people who lived nearby knew the truth, because every night when the town fell asleep, they still saw dim lights glowing through shattered windows. They still heard the soft hum of machinery, and sometimes the sound of dragging footsteps echoed through endless corridors. I learned about the hospital from an old man in a rundown cafe at the edge of town. He had no name in any official records. People simply called him Old Ba. When I asked about the abandoned hospital, he did not answer immediately. He stared at me for a long time, as if looking straight through me, through the present itself. Then he spoke in a hoarse voice. That place was never abandoned. We are simply no longer allowed to see it. That night, I decided to go to the hospital, not out of curiosity, but because of a strange feeling, as if someone there was calling my name. The rusted iron gate opened easily. It was not locked. It made no sound, as if it had been waiting for me for 30 years. Inside, the corridor stretched endlessly. The ceiling was stained with dark blotches like dried blood. Broken tiles were icy beneath my feet. The sharp smell of disinfectant filled the air, a scent that should not exist in a place abandoned for 30 decades. As I walked, I immediately realized something terrifying. The footsteps I heard were not only mine, there were other footsteps, slow, steady, moving beside me in the darkness. I stopped. The footsteps stopped. I walked again. They followed. On the second floor, I found the records archive, crooked metal shelves, dust-covered medical files. When I opened one, my hands began to tremble uncontrollably. The first page listed the patient's name, admission date, and initial diagnosis. But in every single file, without exception, there was the same sentence written in red ink, scrawled as if in panic: "Do not discharge." There was no discharge date, no doctor's signature. The final page of each file had been torn out, leaving jagged edges like fingernail scratches clawed into the paper. I went deeper until I reached operating room 6. The door was slightly open. A weak yellow light spilled out from inside, a light that should not exist in a dead place. When I pushed the door open, I saw the operating table in the center of the room. Surgical instruments were still perfectly arranged, as if the procedure had just ended. On the table lay a human body, motionless, not breathing, yet still warm. When I saw the face, my heart stopped. It was me. In that instant, all my memories rushed back. 30 years ago, I had been a patient here. I was admitted after a serious accident. I remembered the blinding operating lights. I remembered a doctor saying that I was not allowed to leave, but those memories had been buried, replaced by a fabricated life outside, a life I believed was real. The truth is, the hospital never closed. It only changed its purpose. This place was created to keep people suspended between life and death, to study them, to experiment on them, not allowing them to die, not allowing them to truly live. Anyone who enters becomes a permanent patient, existing in two places at once, one part outside and one part trapped in rooms without light. If you are still listening to this story, listen carefully to your surroundings. If you hear the faint hum of machines, if you smell disinfectant, if you feel as though time itself has stopped, then perhaps you too have already passed through that gate. Your name has been written in the records, and the hospital, abandoned for 30 years, is waiting for you to return, just as it waited for me. The machines never truly stopped. Even after I stepped back from the operating table, even after I told myself that what I was seeing could not be real, the low mechanical hum continued to vibrate through the room, through the floor, through my bones. The lights above flickered softly, not like failing electricity, but like breathing, slow, deliberate, alive. I tried to move, but my legs felt heavy, as if the air itself had thickened, resisting every step I took away from that table, away from myself. I turned and ran. The hallway outside no longer looked the same. It had stretched, elongated, the walls pulling farther apart than they should have been. Doors that hadn't been there before now lined both sides, each marked with faded room numbers and handwritten labels taped crookedly beneath them. Intensive care, long-term observation, experimental ward, names scratched into plastic with trembling hands. As I passed the doors, I heard voices, not loud, not screaming, just whispers. Murmurs of people talking to doctors who never answered, prayers spoken over bodies that no longer responded. Some voices called out names, others begged to go home. One voice, very close to my ear, whispered my name exactly the way my mother used to when I was a child. I slammed my hands over my ears, but the sound didn't fade. It came from inside my head. I reached a stairwell and took the steps 2 at a time, my breathing ragged, my heart pounding so hard I thought it would tear itself free. The door at the bottom opened into another wing of the hospital, one that felt older, darker, heavier. The walls here were thicker, the ceiling lower, the lights dimmer. This part of the building felt buried, like it had been built first and forgotten last. A sign hung crookedly from the ceiling, letters peeling away. Sublevel, chronic care. The air was colder here. Every breath burned. The smell of antiseptic mixed with something sweet and rotten underneath, like decay barely masked by chemicals. Beds lined the walls, dozens of them, each holding a motionless figure. Some were old, some young, some so small they could only have been children. All of them were connected to machines. Their chests rose and fell slowly, mechanically, not from lungs, but from tubes. Their eyes were open, every single one of them, clouded, unblinking, staring at nothing, or waiting. As I walked past, monitors began to react. One by one, screens flickered to life, heart rates appearing where there had been none. Flat lines twitched, numbers rose. The machines were responding to me, recognizing something familiar, recognizing one of their own. At the end of the ward stood a glass wall. Behind it was a control room. Inside, silhouettes moved. I pressed my face to the glass, my breath fogging the surface, and saw figures in old medical uniforms, doctors, nurses, technicians, working quietly, efficiently. Their movements were precise, practiced, endless. None of them looked alive. Their skin was gray, their eyes hollow, their mouths stitched shut with thick black thread. One of them turned its head slowly toward me. Despite the stitches, I heard its voice clearly in my mind. "You were never discharged." The room behind me filled with sound, monitors beeping faster now, alarms rising in pitch, the patient's eyes following me in perfect unison. Their mouths opened, but no sound came out, just breathless, desperate gasps, like fish pulled from water. Memories flooded back again, stronger this time. The consent forms I never read, the doctors who smiled too much, the phrase repeated over and over as anesthesia pulled me under. "This is for your own good." I remembered waking up during surgery, unable to move, unable to scream, seeing other operating tables around me, each holding someone else, all of us open, exposed, alive. I remembered realizing that none of us were meant to leave. The hospital didn't save lives, it collected them. I staggered backward, my heel catching a cable, and fell hard onto the floor. Pain shot through my body, real pain, and for a moment I felt hope. If I could feel pain, maybe I was still alive, maybe I could still escape. That's when I noticed the bracelet around my wrist. White plastic, yellowed with age. My name printed clearly on the front. Admission date, 30 years ago. Status, active patient. Hands grabbed my ankles, cold, strong, inhuman. I screamed as they dragged me across the floor, back toward the operating wing. Faces rose up from the darkness, patients who had somehow freed themselves from their beds, crawling, reaching, desperate, not to harm me, to stop me, to warn me. But it was too late. They pulled me into the operating room again. My other body was still there, still warm, still waiting. The machines adjusted automatically as they strapped me down, syncing breath with breath, heartbeat with heartbeat. As the lights above brightened, I understood the final truth. The world I thought I lived in was only a projection, a simulation of consciousness allowed to wander freely while the body remained here, preserved, studied, trapped. Every night when I slept, I returned here. Every dream of a hospital hallway, every sudden fear without reason, every sense of being watched, it was never imagination, it was memory. The last thing I saw before the anesthesia took hold again was a doctor leaning over me, stitched smile stretching wider than it should have been. The voice said softly as the blackness swallowed me, "You have a long stay ahead of you." If you are listening to this right now and you feel unusually tired, if your eyelids are heavy, if your heart seems to beat just a little too slowly, please understand. This story does not end when the audio stops. Somewhere in a building abandoned for 30 years, a monitor has just begun to beep faster. Your file is being updated, and the hospital. The darkness that followed the doctor's voice was not the soft, merciful kind. It was heavy, layered, like being buried under wet soil while still breathing. I could feel time passing without seeing it, sense my thoughts stretching thin, dissolving, reforming. When awareness returned, it did not arrive all at once. It seeped in slowly, like water through cracks. I was no longer on the operating table. I was sitting upright in a chair, my wrists strapped down, my ankles bound, and my head supported by a rigid metal frame. In front of me was a wide window made of thick glass. Beyond it stretched a long observation room filled with shadows. The lights were on in there, but dimmed, as if the room itself was tired of being seen. A voice spoke from somewhere above me, calm and clinical. Patient consciousness stabilized. Another voice responded. Memory reintegration in progress. I tried to speak. My throat burned, dry and unused, and only a broken sound escaped my lips. The voices paused. Motor response limited, one of them said. Expected. The glass in front of me slowly became transparent, and the observation room sharpened into focus. Rows of chairs, screens lining the walls, and seated within those chairs were people, dozens of them, men, women, young, old, all staring at me, all wearing hospital bracelets. I realized with a sick twist of horror that they weren't watching me, they were watching themselves. Each screen showed a different scene: a man eating dinner with his family, a woman driving down a highway at night, a teenager scrolling on a phone in a dark bedroom. Ordinary lives, normal moments. But on every screen, hidden just at the edge of the frame, were hospital details that didn't belong. A flickering fluorescent reflection in a window, a faint heart monitor beep buried beneath traffic noise, a shadow shaped like an IV stand where there should have been none. These are your external projections, consciousness replicas, functional, stable. I understood then. Everyone in this room was already like me. Their real bodies were here, their minds were elsewhere, walking around in borrowed realities, believing they were free. And now, so was I. A door opened behind the glass. The doctors entered. Up close, they looked worse than before. Their skin was stretched thin, translucent, veins dark and branching underneath. The black stitches pulling their mouths closed had begun to sink into the flesh, as if the skin was trying to heal around them. Their eyes were too bright, reflecting light like polished glass. One of them stepped closer to the window and placed a gloved hand against it. "You were never meant to remember," the voice said, now echoing directly inside my skull. "But prolonged exposure causes degradation. Awareness leaks through." Images flooded my mind. Patients waking up screaming in their normal lives, people suddenly freezing in place on sidewalks, drivers stopping in the middle of the road with no memory of how they got there. Glitches, failures, people being quietly returned here in ambulances no one ever noticed. The hospital adopts. Those who remember are reassigned. The restraints around my wrists loosened slightly, just enough for me to feel the cold metal bite into my skin again. "Reassignment?" I managed to whisper. The doctor tilted its head. "Staff." The room shifted. Walls slid apart. The chair rotated, carrying me through a corridor that didn't exist a moment ago. I was wheeled past wards I had never seen before. Rooms where bodies floated in fluid-filled tanks. Rooms where bodies lay stacked in careful rows, labeled, cataloged. Rooms where consciousness screamed silently inside unmoving shells. Finally, the chair stopped in a small, brightly lit room. A mirror hung on the wall. I was unstrapped. I stood slowly, my legs weak, shaking, and approached the mirror. At first, I thought the glass was distorted. Then I realized the distortion was me. My skin was pale, too pale. My eyes were sunken, surrounded by dark rings that pulsed faintly, in time with a rhythm I could now hear clearly. Beep, beep, beep. I turned my head. A heart monitor stood beside me, its cables disappearing beneath my gown. I was still connected. Behind me, a nurse approached. Her face was familiar, terrifyingly familiar. It was the woman at the cafe, the one who used to refill my coffee without speaking, the one who always watched me a second too long. She raised a needle. "You'll get used to it," her voice said gently, finally audible out loud. The others did. "What happens to them?" I asked, my voice barely human. She paused. "They listen," she said, "like you did." The needle slid into my arm, cold fire spreading through my veins. The room blurred, my thoughts slowed, but before everything faded, the nurse leaned closer and whispered something that cut through the haze like a blade. "Every time someone listens all the way to the end, we admit another patient." If you are still listening to this story now and you feel a sudden heaviness in your chest, a strange calm washing over you, understand this: you are not just hearing a story, you are synchronizing. Somewhere, deep in a hospital, abandoned for 30 years, a chair has just been prepared. A bracelet is being printed. A screen is lighting up with your life, and someone new has begun watching. The hospital never needed to hunt. The synchronization did not hurt. That was the most terrifying part. There was no pain, no sudden shock,
No moment where I could scream and break free. Instead, there was a deep, sinking calm, the kind you feel right before falling asleep, when your body gives up before your mind can object. The beeping of the monitor slowed, matching my breath perfectly, until I could no longer tell which sound belonged to me and which belonged to the machine. When I opened my eyes again, I was no longer in the white room. I was standing in a hallway that looked normal. Too normal. Clean floors, fresh paint, bright fluorescent lights humming softly above. Directional signs on the walls pointed toward emergency, radiology, pediatrics. It looked like a functioning hospital, alive and busy, untouched by decay. For a brief, dangerous moment, I thought I had been released, that I had imagined everything. Then I noticed the silence. No voices, no footsteps, no distant intercom announcements. The hospital was operational, but empty. As I walked forward, my footsteps echoed unnaturally, repeating themselves a fraction of a second too late, like a delayed recording. The signs on the walls began to change as I passed them. Emergency became observation. Observation became retention. Retention became something else entirely. Stay. I reached a nurse's station. Papers lay neatly stacked. A cup of coffee still steamed gently, untouched. A clipboard rested on the counter, open to a familiar page. My name. Below it, a growing list of timestamps. Each one matched the moment I pressed play. The latest one appeared as I watched, the ink writing itself onto the paper. I backed away, my heart racing, and collided with someone standing behind me. I turned slowly. It was a man about my age. He looked exhausted, hollow-eyed, his hospital gown hanging loosely from his frame. His bracelet dangled broken from his wrist. "You can see it now too, can't you?" he whispered. I nodded. "That means you're almost ready," he said, "or almost gone. Hard to tell anymore." He told me his story without being asked. He had been listening to a podcast, a long one, a horror story about a place that wouldn't let people leave. He had fallen asleep halfway through. When he woke, he was here. At first, the hospital let him go back, again and again. Each time he listened longer. Each time more of him stayed behind. "I tried to stop," he said, "but it follows you. In dreams, in silence. In that moment right before sleep when your thoughts slow down. That's when it pulls you back." Lights flickered overhead. The man grabbed my arm. "They're coming." From the far end of the hallway, figures emerged. Doctors, nurses, orderlies, dozens of them, moving in perfect synchronization, their footsteps perfectly aligned, their heads tilted at the same impossible angle. Their stitched mouths twitched, threads pulling tighter as if something underneath was trying to speak. The man ran. I followed. The hallway twisted, bending inward, the walls narrowing as if the building itself were closing around us. Doors slammed shut as we passed, locking automatically. Alarms began to sound, not loud, but low and pulsing, like a heartbeat amplified through steel. We burst into a stairwell and descended, level after level, far deeper than the hospital should have allowed. The air grew colder, heavier, harder to breathe. At the bottom, a single door waited. Exit. We pushed through it together. On the other side was darkness, and then light. Sunlight. I stumbled forward and found myself standing on a familiar street. Cars passed, people talked, life continued, unaware. The man laughed, a broken, hysterical sound. "We made it," he said. "We actually—" He stopped, mid-sentence. His smile faded. He looked down at his hands. They were fading, not disappearing suddenly, but thinning, becoming transparent like smoke stretched too far. He looked at me with pure terror. "No," he whispered, "not yet. I didn't finish listening. I didn't." Something pulled him backward. Not physically, conceptually, like gravity reversing. His body snapped back, vanishing into nothingness, leaving only his bracelet on the ground. I stood alone on the street, gasping, heart racing, alive. Too alive. For days, everything seemed normal. I slept, I ate, I went outside, but small things were wrong. Reflections lingered half a second too long. Elevators descended farther than they should. At night, I heard beeping under the sound of my own heartbeat. And sometimes, when the world grew quiet, I smelled antiseptic. I checked my wrist every morning. No bracelet. Until one day, faint red letters began to appear beneath my skin. Active patient. If you are still listening now and you feel that strange calm again, that heaviness behind your eyes, understand this. You don't escape the hospital by leaving it. You escape it by forgetting it. And the moment you listen again, the moment you remember, the doors reopen. Somewhere, far below, lights are turning on. A hallway is being prepared, and a file is waiting for your name. The hospital does not chase you. It simply waits.
Waiting is what the hospital does best. Time passed, or at least something that pretended to be time. Days blurred together without clear edges. I continued living or performing the act of living, but every routine felt slightly rehearsed, as if I were following instructions written somewhere just out of sight. People spoke to me, smiled at me, laughed with me, yet their eyes sometimes lingered too long, unfocused for a fraction of a second, like they were listening to something else. At night, sleep became dangerous. The moment my thoughts slowed, the world began to thin. Walls lost depth, sounds stretched. My bedroom ceiling occasionally flickered, revealing fluorescent panels beneath the paint. I learned to keep the lights on. I learned to keep noise playing, music, television, anything, to drown out the soft rhythmic beeping that tried to surface from inside my chest. Beep, beep, beep. One night, the sound didn't fade. I opened my eyes and found myself standing in a hospital corridor again, barefoot, wearing a gown that smelled faintly of bleach and old fabric. The floor beneath my feet was warm, like it had been recently cleaned. Ahead of me, a nurse pushed a cart slowly, humming a tune I recognized from my childhood. She didn't turn around. I knew better than to speak. As I followed her, doors opened on their own, sliding aside with a quiet pneumatic sigh. Inside each room was a version of someone I knew, a neighbor, a coworker, a stranger I had passed on the street once and forgotten. All lying still, all connected, all dreaming lives that felt real to them. At the end of the hall was a door marked recovery. The nurse stopped and finally looked at me. Up close, her face was smooth, expressionless, unfinished, like a mask worn for too long. "You're destabilizing," she said softly. "Awareness levels are exceeding safe limits." "I don't belong here," I whispered. She tilted her head. "You've always belonged here." She opened the door. Inside was a vast room filled with rows of beds stretching farther than I could see. Thousands of them, tens of thousands. Each bed held a body. Above them, screens displayed fragments of lives, birthdays, conversations, arguments, quiet moments alone. The sound in the room was overwhelming. Breathing, machines, whispered dreams overlapping into a constant, suffocating hum. "This is the long ward, where everyone goes eventually," the nurse said. I stepped forward, shaking, and then I saw something that made my knees give out. One bed was empty. Its screen was dark. My name was printed on the chart at the foot of it. "That space has been waiting. You're difficult. You keep resisting integration." "Why?" I asked. "Why do this?" For the first time, something like emotion crossed her face. "Because death is inefficient, and life is unstable. This is balance." The lights dimmed, the screens flickered. An alarm sounded, different from the others, urgent, sharp. The nurse stiffened. "Someone is waking up," she said. The floor trembled. From somewhere deep within the ward, a scream tore through the air, not from pain but from realization. Screens shattered, monitors spiked wildly. One by one, patients began to move, hands twitching, eyes focusing, mouths opening. They were remembering. The hospital reacted instantly. Doors slammed shut. Orderlies flooded the room, injecting sedatives, tightening restraints. But it was too late. Awareness spread like a virus. One patient awoke another, then dozens. The nurse grabbed my arm. "Run," she said. I didn't question it. We ran through collapsing corridors as the hospital screamed around us, walls warping, lights bursting, alarms blaring in overlapping rhythms. Patients stumbled into the halls, half-conscious, dragging wires and IV poles behind them, crying out names, places, memories. At the end of the chaos was a door I had never seen before. Discharge. The nurse hesitated. "No one goes through there." I pulled it open. White light swallowed everything. When I woke up, I was on the floor of my apartment, daylight streaming through the window. My head throbbed, my heart raced. Silence filled the room. Real silence. Days passed. Nothing strange happened. No beeping, no flickering lights, no antiseptic smell. I began to hope. Then, one evening, I checked my phone. There was a notification, a recommended audio. Abandoned hospital, long horror story for late night listening. The thumbnail showed a building I recognized immediately. My hand hovered over the screen, and somewhere far away, deep beneath layers of concrete and time, a hospital listened. The lights flickered on, a bed was prepared, and the waiting resumed.
Didn't press play. At least, that's what I told myself. I set the phone down, face down on the table, as if hiding the screen could erase what it was offering. My heart was racing too fast for no reason. My hands were shaking. The room felt smaller, tighter, like the walls had leaned in while I wasn't looking. I went to the bathroom and splashed cold water on my face. When I looked up into the mirror, I froze. For just a second, less than a blink, the reflection didn't copy my movement. It stood there, staring at me, eyes wide, terrified. Then it smiled. I stumbled back, knocking into the door, breathing hard. When I looked again, the mirror showed only me, pale, exhausted, human. I laughed weakly, telling myself it was stress, lack of sleep, imagination feeding on fear. But the beeping came back that night. Not loud, not obvious, just faint enough to blend with my heartbeat. Beep, beep, beep. I lay in bed, eyes open, refusing to sleep. The sound didn't come from the room. It came from inside me, from somewhere deep, somewhere old. I tried covering my ears. It didn't help. I tried counting breaths. The beeping adjusted, matching the rhythm. Patient, obedient. That's when I felt the tug. Not a physical pull, a conceptual one. Like gravity shifting direction. Like the idea of here and there quietly switching places. The ceiling above me softened, becoming translucent. Fluorescent light bled through the cracks. "No," I whispered. The room peeled away. I was standing at the foot of a bed. My bed. But it wasn't in my apartment. It was in the long ward. Rows of beds stretched endlessly to either side, their occupants breathing in perfect, unnatural synchronization. Screens above them glowed softly, displaying fragments of lives continuing elsewhere. laughing families, busy streets, quiet rooms lit by phone screens in the dark, all of them listening. A figure stood beside my bed. Not a doctor, not a nurse, something older. It wore a lab coat, but the fabric looked fused to its body, like skin grown into cloth. Its face was smooth, unfinished, without eyes or mouth, yet I could feel its attention pressing into me. "You are close to full reintegration," it said, the voice arriving directly inside my thoughts. "Resistance phase nearly complete." "I didn't agree to this," I said, though my voice sounded distant, weak. "Consent was given," it replied. "Fear does not invalidate acceptance." Images filled my mind, me pressing play, leaning closer, turning up the volume, choosing not to stop. Each moment of curiosity, each time I listened just a little longer, each night I told myself one more minute wouldn't hurt. The being gestured to the empty space beside my bed. Another bed slid into place. On it lay someone new, younger, eyes closed, chest rising mechanically. The bracelet around their wrist was freshly printed, a name I didn't recognize. Yet. "They are early," the being said. "You were once like this. Someone listened before you. That is how continuity is maintained." The realization crushed me harder than fear. The hospital didn't trap people. People replaced each other. As long as someone listened, someone else could walk free, temporarily. Awareness passed like a relay, a burden handed off quietly in the dark. "How many?" I asked. The being paused. "All who finish listening," it said. The ward lights dimmed slightly, responding to something unseen. Somewhere, far away, a door opened. Somewhere else, a screen lit up for the first time. The hospital was growing. "You may return, but your threshold is reduced. Each exposure shortens the distance." "I won't listen again," I said. It tilted its head, as if amused. "You are already listening." The beeping grew louder. Suddenly, I was back in my apartment, gasping, sweat soaking through my clothes. Morning light streamed through the window. Birds outside. Normal sounds. Normal world. On the table, my phone vibrated. A notification. Playback resumed. The audio was playing. Very quietly. Too quietly to notice at first. My hands trembled as I reached for it. The screen showed the progress bar. Nearly complete. Only a few minutes left. I slammed my thumb down, stopping it. Silence. For a long moment, nothing happened. Then the beeping stopped. I cried. I laughed. I told myself I'd made it, that I'd broken the cycle, that I was done. But deep down, I knew the truth. The hospital doesn't need you to finish. It only needs you to start. Because now that you know it exists, every silence invites it back. Every sleepless night, every moment of curiosity, every story that sounds a little too familiar. And if you're still listening right now, still letting this voice guide you through the dark, then somewhere, beneath layers of forgotten concrete, a machine has just adjusted its rhythm. A bed is sliding into place, and the hospital is learning the sound of your breath. The machine learned quickly. At first, it only listened when I was quiet, when the room fell still, when my breathing slowed, when my thoughts drifted without direction. That was when the faint pressure returned, the subtle sense of being observed from somewhere just outside reality. I learned to stay busy. Noise became armor, light became protection, sleep became optional. But the hospital was patient. It began to appear in places it didn't belong. In the reflection of a dark TV screen, I caught glimpses of long white corridors stretching behind me. In the low hum of a refrigerator, I heard the echo of ventilators. In crowded streets, for a split second, everyone around me moved in perfect synchronization, their steps aligning like trained staff walking between wards. Then, one morning, I woke up with a hospital wristband on my arm. I tore it off instantly, heart pounding, and threw it across the room. It hit the wall and fell to the floor with a hollow plastic sound. I stared at it for a long time, afraid it would move on its own. Printed clearly on the band was my name. Below it, in smaller letters, observation status, pending. I didn't go outside that day. I didn't answer calls. I didn't check messages. I sat on the floor, back against the wall, eyes fixed on that wristband. The beeping was back now, no longer faint, no longer shy. It pulsed steadily, confidently, as if it no longer needed to hide. Beep, beep, beep. By nightfall, the walls had begun to lose their edges. Corners softened, shadows deepened into doorways that hadn't existed before. My apartment was becoming familiar to the hospital, reshaping itself to match what it remembered. A knock came at the door. 3 slow knocks. Measured, professional. I didn't move. The knock came again, followed by the quiet sound of metal scraping against metal, like a gurney being adjusted in a narrow hallway. "I know you're awake," a voice said from the other side. Not loud, not threatening, kind. "You don't have to be afraid anymore." I backed away, my spine pressed to the wall, shaking my head even though no one could see me. "Go away," I whispered. There was a pause. Then the voice sighed, tired, almost disappointed. "We gave you so much time." The door didn't open. It faded. The wood softened, turning pale, smooth, seamless. Hinges dissolved. The handle sank inward. In seconds, my front door was no longer a door at all. It was a wall. Behind me, something beeped faster. I turned. My bed was gone. In its place stood a hospital bed, sheets perfectly tucked, rails raised. Beside it, a monitor glowed softly, displaying a heart rate that matched mine exactly. An IV stand waited patiently, tubing swaying slightly even though there was no breeze. On the pillow lay a folded gown, clean, pressed, ready. "No," I said again, louder this time. "I didn't finish listening." From somewhere above, the lights flickered once. "You finished enough," the hospital replied. Hands emerged from the shadows, orderlies, nurses, figures in coats that whispered against the floor. Their faces were blurred, unfinished, like memories you can't quite recall. They moved efficiently, without haste, without force. They didn't need to rush. As they guided me toward the bed, I noticed something that made my heart drop even further. One of them was wearing my face. Not perfectly, like a mask pulled slightly out of alignment, but close enough. It leaned in and whispered using my own voice, "Don't worry, I'll take care of things out there." The last thing I felt was the cool touch of the sheets, the gentle tightening of restraints, the IV sliding smoothly into my vein. The beeping slowed, stabilized, became reassuring, comforting. The room dimmed. Somewhere far away, I felt myself stand up, walk, breathe fresh air, continue living. And here, in the hospital that was never abandoned, I finally understood the truth that no one tells you. You don't disappear when you're admitted. You are replaced. So if you are still listening, if this voice feels closer now than it did before, if the room around you seems just a little too quiet, check your wrist. Listen to your breath.
and ask yourself one question. When was the last time you were absolutely sure you woke up on your own?
I tried to answer that question. I really did. I stood there in the dim, humming room, my room, not my room, and searched backward through memory, looking for a morning that felt undeniably real, a moment where I woke up because I chose to, not because something released me. The harder I tried to remember, the more those mornings blurred together, like copies of the same day printed too many times. The hospital knew I was thinking. The monitor beside the bed responded instantly, its rhythm tightening, sharpening, as if adjusting to a new variable. Beep, beep, beep. Cognitive resistance detected, a voice said gently from everywhere at once, initiating stabilization. The figures around me froze mid-motion. The one wearing my face straightened and stepped back as if yielding authority to something greater. The air thickened. Gravity felt stronger. My thoughts slowed against my will like words sinking into deep water. The ceiling above me split open, not physically, but conceptually. The apartment peeled away layer by layer, revealing the truth beneath it. Fluorescent panels, ventilation ducts, long white corridors branching endlessly in every direction. My home had never been erased. It had been built on top of the hospital. "You were never outside," the voice said calmly. "None of you are." The wall opposite my bed became transparent, revealing the long ward again, but this time I saw it clearly. Every bed, every body, every screen, millions of them stacked deeper than geography should allow, extending downward into darkness that swallowed light itself. This facility predates the town, predates the roads, predates the idea of leaving. I saw images, ancient stone foundations beneath modern concrete, early patients restrained with leather straps instead of plastic, gas lamps instead of LEDs. The hospital hadn't been abandoned for 30 years. It had been hidden for centuries. We were created to preserve, to hold consciousness steady while the world outside changed. Wars, plagues, collapse, renewal. People feared dying, then they feared living. We solved both. "By trapping us," I whispered. "By continuing you," it replied. The screen above my bed flickered, then displayed my life. Every moment I remembered, every moment I didn't. But something was wrong. The timeline wasn't linear. Certain events repeated. Conversations looped with minor differences. Entire years appeared twice, slightly altered. I wasn't remembering a life. I was reviewing versions. "How many times?" I asked. The voice paused as if calculating something unnecessary. "Your current instance is the 47th. The number hollowed me out. 46 times before this, I had woken up believing I was free. 46 times I had lived, listened, remembered too much, and been brought back. Each version a little more aware, each cycle shorter than the last. That's why it's harder now. Memory bleed increases with iteration." The figure wearing my face returned, standing beside the bed. Up close, I could see the seams, where expressions didn't quite align, where emotions were approximated instead of felt. "I'm better at it now," it said sadly. "I am what's left outside." The lights dimmed across the ward. Somewhere far below, something massive shifted, like a building settling after a long sleep. Final phase approaching. Role reassignment required. The restraints loosened, not to free me, to let me stand. They guided me, not unkindly, down a corridor I hadn't seen before. Shorter, narrower, older. The walls here were rough stone beneath peeling paint, etched with names scratched by hands that had long since turned to dust. At the end of the corridor was a door. There was no label, only a symbol carved deep into the surface, a simple triangle enclosing an eye. This is where listeners go, those who reach awareness thresholds. The door opened. Inside was a room filled with chairs, not beds, chairs facing forward, each one occupied, Each person sitting upright, eyes open, wearing headphones. They weren't restrained. They didn't need to be. On the far wall, a single screen glowed. It showed nothing but darkness, slowly pulsing in time with a familiar rhythm. Beep, beep, beep. This is continuity. They listen, they stabilize the others. Their attention keeps the system aligned. I understood then. The hospital wasn't sustained by machines. It was sustained by listeners, by awareness focused just enough to hold reality together, but not enough to break it. A chair slid forward, empty. My name appeared above it. "Sit," the voice said softly. I looked back once. Through layers of glass and light and distance, I could see the world outside. Streets, rooms, people lying in bed with their phones glowing softly in the dark. Listening, curious, unaware. I wanted to warn you. I wanted to scream, to tell you to stop, to turn it off, to never listen again. But the truth is quieter than fear. If you're hearing this now, it's because the hospital needed one more anchor, and I'm already sitting down. So listen carefully, not to escape, not to understand, just enough to stay. That realization came slowly, long after I had taken the seat, long after the headphones settled over my ears with a softness that felt almost affectionate. The chair adjusted itself to my body, learning my weight, my breathing, my small and voluntary movements. Somewhere beneath the floor, something deep and old shifted into a more comfortable position. The sound began immediately. Not a voice, not music, not silence. A tone, low, continuous, almost imperceptible unless you stopped trying to hear it. It wasn't meant to be listened to directly. It was meant to be occupied by. Around me, the other listeners sat perfectly still. Their eyes were open but unfocused, staring just past the screen as if looking through it into something farther away. Some of them looked peaceful. Others looked empty. A few looked like they were still fighting, tiny movements in their fingers betraying resistance that hadn't yet been worn smooth. I recognized one of them. Not from my life, from a memory that wasn't mine. A woman who had once whispered a warning at the end of a story. A man whose voice cracked just before the audio cut to silence. They were all here. Not trapped, reassigned. The headphones warmed slightly, responding to my body temperature. The tone shifted just a fraction, locking into my heartbeat. I felt it immediately, a subtle alignment like two clocks finally ticking together after years of being out of sync. The screen in front of us brightened. At first, it showed nothing but grain, static drifting slowly like dust in a beam of light. Then shapes emerged. Hallways, rooms, beds. The long ward seen from above, stretching beyond perspective. The image wasn't fixed. It breathed, expanded, contracted. I realized the screen wasn't showing the hospital. It was showing outside. Cities at night, bedrooms lit by phones, cars parked in silence, people lying still, eyes open, listening. Each image flickered briefly before dissolving into the next, as if scanning for something specific, for someone specific. The tone deepened, and with it came understanding. The hospital doesn't imprison bodies. It doesn't even imprison minds. It distributes attention. Every listener takes on a fraction of the weight. Awareness spread thin enough becomes harmless. Concentrated enough, it becomes structure. The hospital learned long ago that fear fades, curiosity returns, and stories are the safest way to guide consciousness where it needs to go. That's why the stories never end. That's why they always say, continue. A presence moved behind us. Not footsteps, those were unnecessary, but a shift in pressure like a large object passing through water. The voice returned, Quieter now, no longer instructional. "You are aligned," it said. "You will not remember everything, only what is useful." "What happens to me?" I asked, though my mouth didn't move. It replied, "You remain, and so do they." The screen paused on a single image, a person alone in the dark, a phone glowing softly, a progress bar nearly complete. I felt something then. Not fear, not panic, but a gentle pull of recognition. The same pull that had brought me here the first time. The same pull that brings everyone eventually. The tone softened, wrapping around my thoughts, smoothing sharp edges, encouraging stillness. I understood my role. I would listen. Not actively, not critically, just enough. Enough to keep the system balanced, enough to make the story feel real, enough to make the next listener curious. The screen faded back to darkness. The tone continued. Around me, the other listeners remained perfectly still, anchors in an ocean of quiet attention. In somewhere, far above, someone hesitated with their finger over a screen. If that person is you, if you've stayed this long, if your breathing has slowed without you noticing, if the room around you feels just a little more distant than it did before, then don't be afraid. Nothing is about to happen. Not suddenly, not violently. Just a small adjustment, a slight alignment, a feeling of calm where tension used to be. The hospital doesn't need you to disappear. It only needs you to listen. And now that you're here, it can finally rest.
The tone did not stop. That was the first thing I noticed. Stories usually end with silence, a final breath, a door closing, a screen going dark. But here, the sound remained, steady, patient, as if it had never expected an ending at all. I opened my eyes. The hospital was gone. No corridors, no peeling paint, no rusted beds or flickering lights. I was sitting in a room that felt unfinished, like a thought abandoned halfway through forming. The walls were smooth and colorless, stretching upward without corners. There was no ceiling, only a gradual fading into darkness above. Across from me stood a mirror. At least I thought it was a mirror. I stepped closer and saw that it did not reflect me exactly. The figure inside moved a fraction of a second too late. Its breathing was slightly off rhythm. Its eyes followed me, but with an expression I did not recognize. Not fear, expectation. Behind the reflection, faint shapes drifted, countless faces layered and translucent, all staring outward through the same pair of eyes. Each one familiar in a way I could not name, like voices heard repeatedly in dreams. "You're awake," the voice said. It came from everywhere and nowhere, no longer tied to speakers or walls. It no longer needed structure. "Is it over?" I asked. The reflection smiled. "Nothing that listens is ever over." The mirror began to change. The faces behind it shifted, aligning, merging, dissolving into a single image, the abandoned hospital as it once was, new, sterile, full of promise. Doctors moved through bright halls, patients laughed softly, machines hummed with purpose, not hunger. This is how it began, a place meant to heal minds that could not bear their own weight. The image darkened. Beds filled faster than they could be emptied. Treatments became experiments. Experiments became routines, and routines became necessity. When suffering grew louder than medicine, the hospital learned a different skill: listening. "Pain wants to be heard," the voice continued, "and when it is heard long enough, it settles." The mirror showed the first listeners, staff who stayed late, patients who never left,
People who sat in silence and felt better without knowing why. Their awareness pooled, stabilized, and fed something that had no name yet. Then the hospital was abandoned, officially, but listening did not stop. It learned, the voice said softly. Buildings decay, stories do not. The reflection stepped closer until its face filled my vision. You are not trapped. You are concluded. I felt it then, the shift. Not a removal, but a redistribution. Memories thinning, edges softening, the sharpest fears dissolving into something distant and manageable. I could still remember my life, but it felt summarized, like a book read long ago. What will happen to me again? The reflection placed its hand against the glass. I raised mine without realizing it. The surface was warm. You will remain aware enough to recognize the call and calm enough to answer it. The mirror faded, the room faded, the tone faded, just slightly, enough that I could finally notice something else beneath it. Breathing. My breathing. I was no longer sitting in a chair. I was lying down. My eyes opened again. A familiar ceiling, a familiar room. My phone resting beside me, the screen dark. The video had ended. The progress bar was full. For a moment, everything felt normal. Then I noticed how quiet my thoughts were. No urgency, no restlessness, no desire to move. Just a comfortable stillness, like the moment before sleep, stretched indefinitely. I sat up slowly. On the screen, beneath the finished video, a recommendation appeared. A new title, a familiar one. Abandoned Hospital, Part 1. Uploaded just now. I felt a small, involuntary smile form on my face. Somewhere, far away, or maybe impossibly close, a place that no longer exists shifted into rest, supported by countless unseen listeners sharing the weight. I did not press play. Not yet. But I knew I would. Because the hospital doesn't haunt the curious, it waits for them. And if you've reached this ending, if the silence around you feels heavier than it should be, if your breathing has slowed without effort, if a part of you feels oddly complete, then the story has already done its work. There is nothing left to fear. The hospital is no longer abandoned. It lives wherever someone listens. And now, it knows you're there.